Last year, the Newcastle Knights captured the hearts of the rugby league world, coming out of absolutely nowhere to win 9 games in a row and rocket themselves up into genuine premiership contention. The sight of a sold-out McDonald Jones Stadium was as magical as rugby league gets, and it was fantastic that the loyal fans up there in the Steel City finally had a team that they deserved. Heading into this year with the core of their squad intact and co-captain Jayden Brailey returning from a long-term injury, there was no reason to think that Newcastle would be heading backwards. But sitting 15th after 7 rounds, they have gone backwards, and with the long-term injury to superstar Kalyn Ponga, that trend will likely continue. But we'll get to Ponga later. To me, Newcastle so far have played a bit like a side who just expect to pick up where they left off. Like they expect to be good because they were good last year. And there's definitely an extent to which habits do carry over from one season to another, but each year is a new competition. We saw the North Queensland Cowboys and the Parramatta Eels fall victim to that last year, going from a preliminary final and a grand final respectively to missing the finals entirely. It's very easy to do. You lose 10% of that intensity that you carried the year before, and that can make all the difference. But on paper, Newcastle do have the side to compete in the top half of the table if they're at their best. Here's a best 17 that I threw together earlier, and sure, you could debate bench spots, whatever, but the important part of it is you've got the Dally M winner at fullback, you've got 2 Origin caliber centres, you've got 2 very high quality back rowers, and crucially to me, I think you've got the best hooker rotation in the comp. Now, I'm not saying that either Jayden Brailey or Phoenix Crossland are individually the best hooker in the comp. In fact, I'm not sure either of them would crack my personal top 10. But the sum of those two, to me, beats the sum of any other 9 or 14 duo in the NRL. They are both good players, and I think the Knights are one of the only sides in the NRL who can bring off their starting hooker and genuinely lose no quality. And that is a huge luxury around the middle point of games. Now, I will accept that their halves pairing is not remarkable. Whatever combination of Hastings, Cogger and Gamble you go, they are essentially just solid halves who generally leave the brilliance to those players around them. And when you've got Ponga at the back, that's all you have to be at Newcastle. But it does take me to the issue that I think is central to Newcastle's form so far this season. After Jack Colger's performance in the grand final for Penrith last year, we spent all off-season trying to figure out where he fits into this Newcastle Knights side. Hastings and Gamble had combined so well in their 9 wins in a row heading into the finals, but Colger's heroics were really hard to ignore. The media generally referred to it as a good headache to have, and of course, having too many good halves is way better than having too few. But a good headache is only good if you manage it properly, and unfortunately I think the Knights have done the exact opposite. So we all knew that this issue was coming, and the good headache that Newcastle had was that they would have 3 pretty good quality halves gunning it out all preseason long for 2 positions. It'd be a shootout in training and in the trials, and by round 1 we'd find out who impressed the most. But in the 7 rounds since the start of the season, we've seen Hastings Gamble, Cogger Gamble, Hastings Cogger, and now Hastings Gamble again. And that decision to rotate the halves so much is felt well beyond just those 3 players. We hear it ad nauseum, the importance of building combinations, and how important spending consistent time together in NRL games is to building those combinations. On face value, that is obviously playing a role in the halves. But everything a rugby league team does in attack goes through their halves. Changing them impacts the rhythm of the centres that they pass the ball to, which then impacts the timing of the wingers outside them. The set plays that Newcastle would have spent all pre-season working on are all thrown out of whack. It is that significant. Now, I'm not saying that the round 1 combination of Hastings and Gamble that Adam O'Brien decided on should be untouchable, but when do we ever see a side chop and change their halves and go on to succeed? I mean, for God's sake, the 3-time premiership winning halves have been playing footy together since they came out of the womb. That tells you all you need to know. And then of course there's a reason why you all clicked on this video. The long-term injury to Dally M winger Kalyn Ponga that'll see him miss at least 3 months. The star fullback came into last week's game against the Bulldogs with a hip flexor injury that he suffered against the Roosters the week before, and initially that appeared to be what was hampering him. But at half time, we learned that it was actually a foot problem, and Ponga was sent out again to play, but by the 52nd minute, he was in a moon boot. Now, I touched on this in last week's LTW, which you should definitely watch because it's a very good one, but the way Newcastle handled Ponga's injury from an outside perspective looks like a small club mentality. Now that's a term that's thrown around a lot in the Premier League, and on some level it doesn't really apply so much to a competition that's as even as the NRL is. But leaving Ponga out there injured, with torn ligaments in his foot, just to increase your chances of winning a regular season game against the Bulldogs? That is small club mentality. That's risking the entire big picture because you're overvaluing a single win. Now, the Knights made the finals last year. They should believe that they can make the finals again this year. But putting Kalyn at risk not only shows a lack of faith that the rest of the squad could get the job done against the Bulldogs, but it also shows a desperation that they're now going to pay a really heavy price for. The big clubs just don't do that. And I understand that the big clubs have the luxury of being able to possibly sacrifice a win here or there, but you do have to have long-term thinking. The ultimate goal isn't to beat Canterbury, it's to win a premiership. And I think it was a serious error of judgment that Newcastle prioritised the former over the latter. And that brings me to the coach, who ultimately made the call to keep Ponga out there. Now, I do want to cut Adam O'Brien some slack because we don't know what information he had access to at the time, and it's obviously very easy to look back now that we know he'll be out for 3 months and use that as justification for the decision having been bad at the time. I mean, that's just cheap criticism. But the fact does remain that Ponga was visibly injured. We all saw it. Given that you can't perform an accurate medical assessment during the game, surely the obvious decision is to minimise the risk and take Ponga off. They were already down by 2 tries at halftime anyway. Look, coaches do make mistakes in the same way that players do, and coaches do learn from those mistakes in the same way that players do. But the NRL can be a cutthroat business, and with a very tough few months ahead of Adam O'Brien, he faces a real test to get his Newcastle side back to where the fans hoped that they could be. But let me know what you think about the Knights for the rest of this season. Do you think that they're done? I personally don't. I think this competition, we've seen enough upsets and enough similarities in quality that Newcastle will still be in some sort of finals contention. They will get Ponga back later in the year, but he is obviously enormous to them, and if they do want to start winning games, they do have to fix that halves problem. Anyway, rant over. I think that's about everything I have to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.